Okay, so I'll say a few words about the Foresight Sanity Preservers. The Foresight Sanity Preservers is now it's a daily online salon. It's now in its third week, which seems kind of nuts already. And we started with 2 salons a day. And then as kind of like a few of the very urgent matters, kind of like we're more in action mode rather than in trying to raise awareness mode. I think we switched to 1 a day to make it sustainable. I received quite a lot of requests for actually having like a recurring meeting point between people in Europe and people in Europe, people in North America, and really all over the world to kind of connect in the Foresight community. Originally, it was our plan that this year we would kind of like spread our wings and start like Foresight X's, like a Foresight X in New York, in maybe in Berlin, and London was also interested, but that is obviously not happening. So I'm kind of thrilled that it is happening virtually. And yeah, so if you're interested in sharing this with a few others that may take joy in participating in those, you're very welcome to, because I had a lot of requests asking how private those are, and they are really trying to be open to everyone. That does come with a few complications that we had Zoom bombers and everything, but I think the cool thing about this digital age is that and especially now that we're kind of like evolving really quickly through it and we're iterating really fast. So it's really nice to see like week by week how kind of like how this whole process matures. All right, that's a very, very long intro. But those sanity preservers are really here to serve 3 things. One is kind of create connection for people across the globe. The second one is surface opportunities to help with COVID-19. So projects that are in immediate need of support. And then thirdly, do this a little bit more ambitious thing of trying to imagine kind of seeing this as a kind of lever and thinking a little bit further of like what is the future that we could kickstart with this crisis. So I think it seems like we're further away from the beneficial futures that I think many of us want, but maybe perhaps we're perhaps even a little closer if we give it the right nudges. So the salons to explore opportunities around this. I'm going to post a few pages on how you can follow up on the videos that are uploaded daily and so on and so forth here in the group chat. I'm super thrilled to have Yancey here, and I think he has definitely founded, I think, one of the companies that if you think about companies that actually do good, if you don't want to kind of like purchase the warm fuzzies and kind of like the sustainability of investment separately, then I think really the first example that comes to mind is Kickstarter. Actually, I think it's used quite a lot now, even like within cryptocurrency, discussions, just as a way of like, whenever someone is trying to make crypto actionable, they're like, well, but we could do something like assurance contracts or, something like Kickstarter, but like with crypto. And so it's really interesting how this became kind of like the pool to really kind of like coordinate people on doing good. I think I think I once checked out a few numbers of like how many projects you founded and funded when I was in those crypto discussions, and it's really stunning. I think you have a ticker or something on the website even. Anyways, that's not really the only thing that he's doing, apart from co-funding this project that I think allows everyone and any one of us to kind of like really put their money where their mouth is in doing good. He's also wrote a fantastic manifesto on the future toward a more generous world, which I can also share the link to that here, and has now founded Bentoism, which is the topic of discussion today. And he's already shared with me that it's going to be quite a workshopy format, which I think I'm super excited about, because when's a better day to do that than on a Saturday? So I'm hoping that we can maybe make this quite like a wholesome, nice weekendy experience. I'm super thrilled for what you're going to tell us. I'm going to share your bio, and I'm going to share like a little kind of like description of the talk in the chat. But yeah, I'm super thrilled you're here, and I can't wait for this. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Alison. Morning, everyone. Or early afternoon or evening. Nice to see you all. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start by talking for about, say, 20 minutes or so. And then we will start to go into some interactive things, and there'll be some journaling and some talking to a stranger. So you can see the topic is self-awareness in a crisis. And, you know, self-awareness in a crisis sounds like a luxury, like Prada in a pandemic. You know, there are more important things than self-awareness in a crisis moment. But I actually think that self-awareness is actually critical to surviving a crisis. And it's actually one of the most available tools we all have to navigate these kinds of moments. Um, you know, when there is a crisis, when there's an alien invasion or a giant spider invasion, you know, everybody runs. Everybody runs. That's the easy thing that we all know how to do. But only a smaller number of people are doing more than just running from the giant spider. They're actually running towards something. It's normally Tom Cruise running with a plan in mind. In a crisis, not just reacting to get away from the danger, but try to move towards something. And so it's that second action in a crisis that I think is so important, and I think is not possible without that kind of self-awareness. And, you know, we're in a crisis moment now that is a unique one, but it's also potentially a preview for a much longer crisis to come. So I actually think the lessons and the things that we're doing to change our lives now might end up being more permanent in the longer run than is normal, just because this is really a sped up microcosm of a lot of what's going to happen. So in this conversation, in this talk, I want to give you more context for these ideas, give you a kind of a UI for navigating your awareness, for growing your self-awareness. And I think the best place to start is just to start with how I came to these ideas. So I grew up in Southwest Virginia, a place called Giles County in the Appalachian Mountains. This is the farmhouse where I grew up. That's a baby blue Volkswagen Rabbit in front. That was our car. And, you know, this is a working farm that I lived in until, I lived in this house until age 17. My family weren't farmers. We rented the house from the people that did. But it was a very rural area. I grew up just reading books, went to evangelical church, and, you know, always dreamed of sort of the larger world, really through books. A lot of that happened. And after graduating college, I moved to New York City. And there I pursued a dream I'd always had of being a music critic. I'd always loved writing, wanted to be a writer, and writing about music, which was my other greatest love, was my biggest ambition. And I got to do that. I made a living in New York City for 10 years, reviewing records for the Village Voice and Spin Magazine. I started a record label. I had day jobs at editorial related companies. And it was during that time that I made a new friendship with a guy named Perry Chen that led to the creation of Kickstarter. Perry had the idea for Kickstarter about 4 years beforehand, about 2001, 2002. He had been wanting to throw a concert in New Orleans and didn't have the money to do it, and had this idea of what if he proposed the idea for the concert online. People put up their credit cards to buy tickets, but no one is charged unless the show sells out. In this way, rather than him being the decision maker, everyone can collectively decide whether or not this is worth doing. So he pitched me on this idea of what was crowdfunding. And so we started working on it together. And this was the very first design of Kickstarter. This is in 2005. So this is the same time that like Facebook is starting. MySpace is the king of the internet at this point. So we started on this project quite a long time ago. And you know, this is a picture of like the whiteboard in our apartment as we're sketching out early ideas. But you know, this image to me says so much about what the experience was of becoming an entrepreneur. Like I was a creative person. Perry was an artist. Charles Adler, also co-founder, was a designer. And for us to cross over from the creative world into the business entrepreneurial world felt like a weird kind of class betrayal. Like I remember going to Staples and buying this whiteboard and feeling guilty, like we weren't supposed to go in there. So there was just this notion of a strong, clear divide between the creative world and the business world. And we were sort of crossing over that. But after many years of struggle, the Kickstarter launched in 2009. This was the first project to ever be funded. Someone said, if you give me $5, I'll draw you a picture of something. I got $35 from 3 people, quite modest, but like meant the world to us at the time. Because it really proved that the system worked. And it also really answered what the big belief we had about the platform itself was, which is that the creative world that we came from, it was only funding ideas that had a chance to produce revenue. You know, the labels and movie studios are looking for hits. But yet, we thought that leaves so much out of the table. The art, the culture that we care about isn't profit maximizing, isn't meant to be revenue producing. It's just an idea. And we wanted Kickstarter to be the place where that idea could just happen. And so we always sort of followed through on that. And we followed the sort of our own vision of what Kickstarter success should be. So from the beginning, we said that we didn't want to sell the company or try to go public. We weren't trying to cash out. That the goal of Kickstarter was to be meaningful to the creative community over the long term. That like being the Green Bay Packers of the internet, being this kind of public trust is the ultimate version of success for us. Like that fit our value system. And so that led us to turn Kickstarter into a public benefit corporation at the height. Writing Kickstarter's corporate bylaws to say that the company will not just focus on maximizing shareholder value as for-profit companies are expected to do, but the company must legally balance that with producing a positive benefit to society. And Kickstarter's PBC charter includes prohibiting the company from using legal but esoteric tax avoidance strategies and things like that. So this is an example of trying to bind Kickstarter's interests with the public interests and not have the company sort of extract value from the world, but to even create more value than it takes for itself. And I was CEO of Kickstarter when we became a PBC. We were very proud of it, and it was an unusual move. We were in the first companies to do this. But at the same time, I had a lot of doubts about our path. As deeply as it fit with my belief systems, I had doubts, and a lot of it was the business culture that I was in. If you look at the language on these magazines, the CEO is out for blood. These businesses own the world. This is not language of like building a great company or hiring the right people. This is language of conquest and war. And so I remember when I was CEO, I was standing in line at the checkout aisle and I saw this magazine looking back at me. And I saw this red font, this splash of yellow, this language, be paranoid, go to war, disrupt yourself. And even though as a CEO, all I did was worry or dream new things to worry about, this still made me think, shit, maybe my problem is I'm not worried enough. It just plays these strings so hard. So this larger culture we're in tells us a lot about the game that we're playing. And even those of us who are choosing to play a different game, it's a struggle because the messages around you sort of reinforce a different value system. I was always made to feel how different I was than the water I swam in. And that larger force, I call financial maximization. And this is just a very simple belief that the right choice, the best outcome in any decision is whichever option makes the most money. And that's just really how we should make choices. That is the rational way to make decisions. And I could feel in Kickstarter how that's how the world functioned. I saw it in our friends who ran their own companies or peer companies who raised a lot of venture capital money, which was in effect, they were signing a post-dated check and all decisions were sort of reverse engineering to that outcome. And you could just see how the decision-making changed, how what had been a wider swath of values used to guide the future of the product now becomes a singular value of growth or a certain type of financial outcome. And so what's interesting is that this mindset hasn't always been there. And in fact, we can see it's taken off in a new way in the last half century or so. This is a graph showing the average American worker wages from the 1940s to the 2010s. And you can see from 48 to 73, the wages of the average American worker grew by 91%. But from 73 to 2013, there was this split. The productivity gains continued to increase, but compensation stopped growing. And in fact, since 73, adjusted for inflation, the average worker compensation is barely over 10% more than what it was back then. Which means that the high point for pay for productivity of American workers was 73, the same year Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon came out. It's a long time ago. But you might say, well, how did families make up this gap as sort of the way the economy functioned changed? And certainly there's a lot more two-income households is a big part of it. But the other one is credit cards. Through the 1960s, there were virtually no credit card debts in America, but in the 1970s, credit cards began to appear. And if you layer over the outstanding credit card debt per household over these flattening wages, we can see that we've made up this gap with debt. And increasingly, that's how many of us function. As I was digging more into these dynamics, I came across this amazing study, this fascinating study that UCLA has done since the 1960s. And every year UCLA interviews incoming college freshmen all across America, so all across the country, and they give them a lot of different questions. And one of the questions is about their goals in life. And they're given a list of possible life goals, and they're asked, is this essential or not essential? And one of these has to do with money. And it says, quote, being very well off financially. And in 1970, the percentage of incoming college freshmen who said to, quote, be very well off financially was essential or very important was 28%. That year, the most common life goal, the one deemed most essential by college freshmen, was to, quote, develop a meaningful philosophy on life. Something like 84% of students said that was an essential or very important goal. In 2017, the last year this study came out, the percentage of incoming college freshmen who said being well off financially was essential or very important was 82%. The goal of having a meaningful philosophy on life has dropped to less than half of students saying that's important. And so if you graph out the change in values over this period of time, the growth of the belief in becoming rich is by far the biggest gain. The percentage of people who want to be an artist is the same. The percentage of people who want to start a family or succeed in their career is the same. But there's been this interesting shift. Oh, sorry, someone going to say something?
Well, I wanted to ask a question, and maybe you'll address it in a moment. I just wonder if you have any good ideas, or better yet, any ideas substantiated by data for why this shift occurred.
For why this shift occurred?
Well, yeah, the shift into financial stability being such a paramount.
Yeah, well, I think there's I have a different version of talk where I go into more of that, but I think part of it is it's a rational reflection of reality, which is that wages stopped growing, the costs of life increased. And so I think people have just been more and more squeezed, I think has been part of it. So one part I think is a desire to not be poor, and just knowing the struggle of that. And I think another part is that our cultural emblems of success and our notions of what success is have really sort of honed in on a limited notion of what value is. And I'll get into more about why I think that is as I go on. And so, and someone just pointed out in the comments, maybe this shows people have a meaningful philosophy on life. Yes, I agree. I ended up stepping down as CEO of Kickstarter about 2.5 years ago. And when we became a PBC around then, like really started digging more into the philosophy and the underpinning of, say, the belief in shareholder value maximization, trying to understand where these ideas came from, and just threw myself into research and into being a writer again, and just trying to understand sort of how these things happen. And there were two books that I found to be really fascinating. One was a book by a man named Michael Walzer. It's called Spheres of Justice. And in this book, Walzer argues that the source of all injustice is when a value system rules beyond its rightful domain. And generally that happens because it has a lot of power. And like the classic example he gives is the Catholic Church demanding that Galileo refute the values of science for the values of the church because the church was more powerful than science. And at any time that a value system rules unjustly or beyond its domain, it limits the possible outcomes for everyone involved. And it's just a form of injustice, and really all injustice could be traced back to that challenge. Walzer gives this very classic quote from Pascal, Blaise Pascal: there are different companies, the strong, the handsome, the intelligent, the devout, and each person reigns in their own, not elsewhere. But sometimes they meet, and the strong and the handsome fight for mastery, foolishly, for their mastery is of different kinds. They misunderstand one another and make the mistake of each aiming at universal dominion, but nothing can win this, not even strength, for it is powerless in the kingdom of the wise. This notion that there's a right and wrong domains for values to rule, I found to be really fascinating. And Walzer even argues that like monopolies can be just, they can be justly earned. So I thought it was quite a nuanced take. And I went to look for other people who had built on Walzer's ideas. And I came across another fantastic book by philosopher Elizabeth Anderson called Value and Ethics in Economics. And in this book, Anderson really digs in with Walzer's ideas, and especially this notion of sort of value being pluralistic. And Elizabeth Anderson calls this form of value expressive value. And she says the idea that value is a singular rational notion, as we've come to believe with money, is simply false. She writes, we care about things that aren't really important, justify our actions on things we don't really believe in. To do this, we'll create material wealth, but this fails to provide us with a coherent basis for self-understanding and requires disturbing divisions among different aspects of the self. Rather than determining which option will maximize your ideal outcome, this approach, her approach of expressive value, says the first step is to see what frame this fits in and to see what the right expressive norms and practical responses should be. And so I found this to be quite brilliant. And I really particularly love this idea of finding the frame, finding the right lens as the first step. Like before maximizing that value, first just like identify what is the value that's most at stake. And so while I was thinking about these two books, I had a day where I was just doodling in my notebook and I drew this, the hockey stick graph, the crucifix of the business world, the emblem of the ultimate success of your self-interest, growing so fast the line slopes up and to the right. And as I just doodled this, I had this thought of, well, don't both of the axes on this graph extend? Doesn't the x-axis measuring time, it goes from now all the way into the future. And the y-axis measuring self-interest, it also keeps growing. I would say that as your self-interest grows, so do your responsibilities. It goes from a me to an us. And so I ended up extending the lines on this graph and drew all this blank space and thought, what is this? What is this space we're looking at? And I drew sort of two boxes to make it a simple 2x2. And I thought, oh, here I'm looking at not just one dimension of self-interest, but I'm actually looking at four different ones. There's this now me in the bottom left corner. That's what I want and need right now. There's this future me space in the bottom right, what the older, wiser version of me wants me to do, the person I want to live up to being. There's now us, my family, my friends, my coworkers, the people that I'm accountable to, responsible to, what they want and need from me. And also there's future us, the world my kid is going to inherit, or even I will live in when I'm older. My choices also shape that too. And I came to see how every decision I make has a footprint in each of these spaces, but yet I'm basically blind to everything other than this now me. And I thought, what is this a picture of? And so I just wrote a very basic description. This is a visualization of beyond near-term orientation, just a way to see longer term, way to see beyond right in front of your face. And as I looked at that, I realized it was an acronym for bento. And I thought, oh, it's a bento box. It's a bento box. The same way a bento box has the 4 or 5 compartments in a lid, which lets you carry a variety of dishes without anything getting spoiled. So a bento is always a balanced meal. The bento also honors a Japanese dieting philosophy called harahachi bu, which says the goal of a meal is to be 80% full. That way you're still hungry for tomorrow. And so Bentoism, I thought, is the same idea, but for our values, our self-interest, and really how we see our actions and our impact on the world. Now, I think that what's important here is that each of these spaces is represented. You know, it's framed as beyond near-term orientation, but it's saying that the now is absolutely important. It's not diminishing now me. It's not saying that it's wrong to be selfish. It's saying there's just a whole wider space that we behave in. And I think this lines up pretty neatly with Maslow's hierarchy, where our now me needs are kind of those just safe and just being safe and protected. Without our now me feeling secure, it's harder to operate in those other places. Now us is about creating love and companionship. Future me is about living up to an idealized version of yourself. And future us is sort of imagining the world that comes after you. And there's a point in life where we're able to really think about that. I also think this lines up with Freud's ideas of the subconscious, sort of the ways that these different voices pull at us. And I think this, basically the bento is a kind of a UI. It's an interface. It's not just a way of seeing what's happening, but it's a way to actually act based on our full self-interest. So I want to give a couple examples. So let's imagine a smoker asking their bento, should I quit smoking? So to do this, the smoker asks each of these boxes this question distinctly and tries to hear what that voice says. So for a smoker, their now us in the top left says, you should quit. Yes, your family hates it. It's bad for your kids. The smoker's future us says, yes, you should quit. Imagine if your kids smoke because of you. The smoker's future me says, yes, you should quit. Like, I want there to be a future me. But the smoker's now me says, no, keep smoking, because now me is addicted to nicotine. Quitting is going to suck. Weirdly, based on its very limited perspective, it has a rational point of view. It's similar with prioritizing moving off of fossil fuels. Our now us, our future me voices, which want to be virtuous, which know the right things, say, yes, we should do this. This is the right thing to do. But the now me says it's too hard, it's too expensive. I can't commute. My life is just not at that place yet. And so this also shows us how you sort of evolve people's opinions. In the case of a smoker, how have we tried to help smokers quit smoking? By making their now me harder to smoke. We make cigarettes more expensive. We tried to ban them from public spaces. You're trying to shift the default now me from yes to no, just to tilt that box in another direction. I think for changing behavior around climate change, it's going to be a similar thing. There's going to have to be a now me self-interest for a lot of people to engage. But so what you can see here is that the bento gives you a kind of a bird's eye view, right? It's allowing you to see not just what's in front of you, but just the full spectrum of what's going on. And this is helpful because normally how most people operate is with this kind of passive awareness where we can see now me. Imagine this is a heat map where our attention is very attuned to now me. We know what's going on there. We have a vague sense that these other spaces exist, but they're not that clear. They don't speak that clearly to us. They're more emotional. We see them as less rational. And maybe we don't make choices really thinking about them all that often. And this becomes a problem, like with the example of smoking, where a choice that is good for now me, that now me wants, but is actually bad for your friends and family. That's bad for your future us. That's bad for your future self. This can look like a good decision to someone who has that limited passive awareness. And this, one where it's bad for your now me takes a hit, but it's good for every other dimension of life. This looks like a bad decision. This looks like something not to do. So when our perspective is shifted to just that small space, I think we really miss out on a lot of the outcomes. So the alternative is to have this active awareness where you can at least perceive that all these spaces exist. And when you have that kind of choice, you can look at an option like here, one where the now me is a good, but everything else is bad. And here you can see really what's happening in every one of these spaces. With an active awareness, you're checking in with each of those boxes. And you can even craft and design solutions that fulfill their needs. And so if you think about this bento model, it could show us sort of the challenge of different kinds of choices we have to make. So we can say a choice that's bad for now me, but that benefits now us, and future me. We could call that a sacrifice. A choice that's good for now me, that now me wants, but all the other spaces of our life enjoy, all the other spaces of our life don't want, we could call that an addiction. Choices that are good for now us and now me, but say bad for future us and future me, say what private equity will do to a company, we could call that short-termism. And then you have something where the now us and now me says, no, we can't do this, but the future us, future me wants this. And these are like dreams deferred, wanting to launch a company, wanting to be creative, wanting to start another career. You want it in the long term, but right now you can't get there. So the benefit of seeing this in this way is that this allows you to change this, right? For a decision like this, where your now says no, but you want this in the long term, this creates an obvious next step question, which is, okay, not now, but when? This can allow you to scope what the steps are to get where you actually want to be. So now we're going to talk about how to do this. So there's both a bento as just a way of seeing, but there's also a bento as a way to actually getting to know your specific values and your goals. So to do that, there's just a very, very, very simple question that lives inside each box. For now me, what do I want to need right now? For future me, what does future me want to need? And so on. The first time I went and answered these questions, this is literally what it looked like. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see. So what do I want to need from my now me? I answered Maslow kind of things: good health, money in the bank, a sustainable lifestyle, emotional groundedness, self-awareness, curiosity, purpose. My future me, what must always be true of me for me to live up to who I am? I said, don't sell out, be loyal to my values, be hungry to learn, be able to self-correct, see the bigger picture. My now us, what's at the heart of my relationships? I realize it's deep time, that I can spend 5 hours with a friend and never look at my phone. At the same time, I'm a terrible acquaintance. If you text me, I might never write you back. My future us, what do I want for my child? I want a better world, of course. And I wrote down things that means about the environment and fairness. So I came with just a lot of ideas, just sort of a brain dump, and we're going to do this together in just a minute. And I ended up circling and sort of honing in on themes and trying to say what is most distinctly me in each of these spaces. And I came up with this. My now me, what is my now me value? It's showing people the matrix. If I looked at what was most important in my now me space and what's most specific to me, I feel like this encompasses like when I'm in my flow state, when I'm at my best. My future me, that older version of me, what's it telling me? It says create harmony. I'm a child of divorce, so I like to try to keep things together, but also to don't sell out, to hold on to those values. I saw that in Kickstarter, and it continues to be a deep thing for me. My now us is about a small group of family and friends and deep time. And the future us is about there being a better matrix, not that the matrix doesn't exist, but how can we help it work to our advantage? And so I use these to make choices, and I use these to really guide my life over the past 2 years. A real world example of this. Sometimes one way in the old world, pre-corona world, I made a living is by doing public speaking. And I would get asked to do talks, sometimes for companies I didn't like, companies whose values didn't align with me. And every time I've been asked to do one of these things, I've said no. I've always said no. But in this case, I thought I should ask the bento what it says I should do. And when I get asked them before, I would even get irrationally angry at having been invited. But when I asked the bento, I was fascinated with what happened. My now me, which wants to show people the matrix, says, yeah, you should do this talk. It makes sense. My now us, which wants deep time, says, an hour and a half to talk about ideas seems cool. My future us, which wants to build a better matrix, says 100%. This is absolutely what you need to do. Yes. And then I got to my future me voice that says, no. Are you sure you aren't just selling out? And suddenly this voice that had been so irrationally angry in the past and had stopped me from taking this action, I could see it for what it was. And I saw it as like a bouncer looking out for my values. This big dude standing outside, and I had the right, I had the agency to tap that person on the shoulder and say, no, it's cool, I got this. But because I had this active awareness, I could see the bigger picture. Instead of in the past, I got fixated on one space feeling wrong to me. I instead saw all the spaces that felt right and made a decision that was ultimately self-coherent despite being the opposite of what I've done before. And so now let's do this. We're going to do this together. So very simple. Love for everyone to just get a piece of paper and a pen. You can use your computer screen if you want. I think piece of paper will be a little more interesting, a little more fun. And you're just going to draw just this simple 2x2. You don't have to write, I wouldn't write the now me, future me inside those boxes because you're going to end up writing in each of those. We're going to do our brainstorming. But yeah, let's go ahead and get a piece of paper. I'll give you a minute to get that ready. And then we'll start writing. Thank you all. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this brainstorming process of just like, you just sort of getting out what feels most true to you in those spaces. We're gonna do it pretty quickly. And then afterwards, you're gonna pair with someone and you're gonna share what you've put down and you're gonna help each other make a choice. You're gonna help each other make a real life should I decision. So once everyone's ready, I'll just say 10 more seconds and then you could draw your boxes. You could see how hard it is to draw straight lines by how terrible my own picture is and that this is the best one I could show. So be forgiving. So once you've drawn those boxes, let's start with the bottom left. Let's start with now me. Now me. So now me is the selfish part of you. It's the bottom rungs on Maslow's hierarchy. It wants safety. It wants pleasure. It wants autonomy. It likes to do what it likes to do. The now me is the part of you that like, you need to have these 3 things every day or else you're going to feel crazy, like those kinds of things. So what are those things for you? What are those things that you need to feel safe and secure and to feel yourself on a given day? So what do I want and need? So right now, just take, say, 60 seconds to write down whatever comes to mind. I'm going to put my own, what I wrote here on the screen so you could just have a prompt. You can steal if you want. I'm going to set a little timer and just just about 60 seconds, just writing down whatever comes to mind. Fifteen more seconds. All right. So next we'll go to the bottom right to future me. So think of future me as the obituary that you wish you could have. When I think of my future me, I imagine the salt and pepper version of myself standing on the cliffs of time, wind blowing through his hair, still got the bod. And that voice is whispering back. It's this Obi-Wan Kenobi whispering back saying, here's the things that always must be true. In every situation, remember this. What is that for you? What does your future me want and need of you? What are those values? What are those things that are most true of you, must always be true of you? They give you 60 seconds to just write down what comes to mind. Fifteen more seconds. Okay. Now we're going to go to the top left to now us. So now us are the people that we rely on, who rely on us, our family, our friends, our coworkers. I imagine our us is not like every living creature on earth, but more the people that we feel a responsibility for, we feel an emotional tie to. Maybe for you, that's something bigger. You know, our neighborhoods are kind of us. But if you think about those people, what is at the heart of your relationships? What do you give each other? Are you a shoulder to cry on, a person who gives advice, having fun adventures together? Are you a good listener? What is at the heart of your relationships? What is the value you bring? Let's take 60 seconds and write down whatever comes to mind. Fifteen seconds. Okay, the last one is future us in the top right. Here, I'm imagining the world my child will step into. The world 20 years from now, 30 years from now, even farther. What is important about that world? What are the values that are that you carry that, how do they project into that world? For me, a lot of this comes down to things about the environment or about how loving the world is. But what are those things for you? What are those causes or things you most care about? Take 1 minute and write those down, then we'll move on. Fifteen seconds. All right, great. So now you should have something that looks something like this. Just a word dump, a brainstorm of the kinds of things that are important to you. So the next step is that we're going to pair up. We're going to pair up and we're going to have a guided conversation. It's going to be very simple. We're going to take turns. One person is going to be the bentor and the other person is going to be the bentee, and we'll switch roles. And for the first 7 minutes, the bentor, one person will say, what's your name and what's in your bento? And the other person will respond and say, my name is whatever your name is, and here's my bento. And you'll just read out what's inside each box. If you want to give context, you can. I think just sort of saying what's there for you is fine. After you finish saying what's in your bento, the interviewer says, how does it feel to say that out loud? And the bentee will answer, because you will feel something having said that out loud. The bentor will then ask, does anything surprise you? And you will reflect anything that surprises you, either good or bad. This feels especially true or especially not true. And finally, the bentor will say, is there anything you want to ask your bento? And here, you as the bentee, if you have one, could ask a should I question. So in the same way I showed the example of me asking, should I do a talk for a company I don't like, where I sort of ask each space of the bento what it said, you're going to do the same thing with your question. And the bentor will help you think it through. So as you're saying, well, now me says this and future us says that, the other person can help you think about that. So for the first 7 minutes, all the focus will be on this one bentee, and then I'll send a notification in your breakout rooms, and then we'll switch roles. And then the person who was being interviewed becomes the interviewer. And you'll just help each other see what's inside those bento boxes. And we'll share in the chat what this script is so you can remember. Very simple. And Allison, if you can create the breakout rooms, is that right?
Yes, I have 2 participants. It currently says 1 to 2 participants per room. So if you are, you'll get an invite in a second for a breakout room. And if you are in a room where you're the only one, I will move you to a different room, okay? All right, so I will create the rooms now. And I think we can, once you get the invitation, we can still send the script as a broadcast message into your breakout rooms. But maybe, I've also written them down here. Maybe it would be good to
I'm just going
share
to write them in
now
chat
or
right
in the
now.
chat. Okay, great. Then people have them handy. Okay, super. I'm going to create the breakout rooms now. So you should have gotten an invitation to the rooms. And if you're one in, if you end up finding yourself alone, don't worry, I will be moving you swiftly to a room with someone else. Okay.
Does anyone want to share anything that happened in your group?
I think there was a funny thing that I don't know. There was no this question number 4 in the chat, but I remember that there was a, should I? The question should I? And the funny part was that both me and Ali and my bento partner had exactly the same should I, with exactly the same position in 4 squares. Like,
what was your question? What was the question?
the question was, should I start? It was kind of like Ali said, should I start a podcast?
One of my surprises was in my Future Us. I found myself writing down like more selflessness and community awareness. And I moved to China 10 years ago, and just for a brief period of time. And I remember just being like kind of appalled and like viscerally against the way that people would just like, for example, not protest having their homes bulldozed to make the Bird Nest Stadium or things like this. And so I guess when I kind of came up with that and wrote that down, I was surprised at how my views have changed as I've matured, and also as, you know, we've all been through this interesting situation.
Maybe one more person want to share, and then we'll, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Gillian. Appreciate that.
Jillian.
Yeah. Yeah, someone's raising their hand. Go for it.
Hi. Yeah, so I was thinking about the now me when you said now me, and I says, I got to go grab my rabbit. So I went outside, got my rabbit, my rabbit, and then the rabbit pooped all over the couch. And it's like, okay. So that was like, you kind of threw off my plans, what I was going to talk about, but that became a now issue.
Great, great. Well, we'll drop the mic there. If everyone's just to mute again, and I'm just going to do a few more slides and then one more exercise. We can have another conversation at the very end, but would love to sort of build on what we just did for just a minute. Yeah, so we went through this process of sort of sharing and mirroring each other. What I've experienced in that is that the process of saying to a stranger who you are and sort of being held accountable to that through a decision-making process is interesting. It sort of reveals what's going on inside of you. There's a website, bentoism.org, it's like a very trippy website. It's like going to a spa that will guide you through this process. Will guide you through building your bento, the same sort of thing we went through, something you could share with a friend if you wanted to say, hey, you should try this thing. It will also guide you through sort of drilling in on your sort of core keywords you want to use. And my own bento is something that I keep as the lock screen on my phone, sitting right next to me in the room I'm in right now. In a world where magazines tell me to disrupt myself, I find this like reminder of who I am and my values to be helpful. And especially so during a crisis moment. You know, to return again to Tom Cruise on this notion of how do you not just run from a crisis, but run towards something. It's having active awareness. It's being able to perceive all of these spaces. And in most situations, there is both a passive and an active response. There is a system one sort of immediate instinctual response. So in the case of now, that's buying toilet paper. But maybe there's also an active solution that's trying to not just solve this for right now, but to solve this for all future iterations. So like a bidet. Or where we are in the response to the coronavirus, the lockdown, I think, is the passive response, like locking yourself in your home when there's an invisible killer on the loose, makes a lot of sense. The more active response is the testing, the management, trying to manage and work through danger. And so what happens, the way those active responses become possible is seeing that larger picture. Two of the most iconic examples of crisis responses both show this kind of active awareness. In Naomi Klein's book, Shock Doctrine, she writes about companies and governments using crises moments to push through things that would be unpopular at other times. And then there's the famous case of the Tylenol poisonings, where people were being killed by cyanide in Tylenol bottles, and the CEO of Tylenol pulled all Tylenol bottles from shelves. I think both of these examples, one seen as like an amoral thing or immoral thing, one is a moral decision, I think are both examples of active awareness, where these organizations or companies are seeing their long-term goals even in a crisis moment. And they're pursuing those within the crisis state. They're not stopping their goals because of the crisis. They're continuing to pursue them, but yet in this new reality. And so I think that is a place where you can have a lot of impact. For us personally, there are layers to this crisis. And I think one of the hardest ones is that we could think of these separate boxes as our different compartments of life. And modern life allows us to separate those things. Our Our individual self is maybe different from our family self. We have our work person, we have our exercise person. But now that we're all locked in, these things are all piled on top of each other. There is now incoherence. Whatever our strategies of before, they are now breaking down. And now we're all living with whatever our situation is, and we're all stuck with it. And not just for us, but the people that we're around. So the passive response to this is just to veg out and to just try to dial out, tune out. The active response is to lean in and say, what is it that I want out of this time? This time matters. This time isn't nothing. How do I make the most of that? And so this is where I like to end is with a very simple process, which is I have a weekly ritual where I go to the bento, not as a way to make decisions, but as a way to brainstorm and inspire what's inside of me. And I just very simply write down in my notebook, how should I use my energy? And I let each of these spaces respond. So for example, I'll tell you, the first time I did this, it was my book had just come out, and I was so obsessed with its commercial success that I was like refreshing every social media feed, like so fast I would have been tested for blood doping if I were in the Olympics, just looking for positive affirmation. I was trapped in this loop, and all I wanted to do is to do more self-promotion. And I had this thought of, no, I need to activate this larger awareness. And so when I asked my full self how I should use my energy, my now me said, yes, do a sweepstakes, promote yourself, like write a newsletter. It's all the things I was feeling. But my future me, which wanted me to live up to my greatest potential, reminded me of a book I wanted to read that would be relevant to my work. It told me I should build relationships with these larger institutions, that I should be thinking about the long game here. My now us reminded me that when I talked to a friend the day before, it had been an amazing experience that had really reset myself, and that I had time with my family, and of course that was valuable too. And my future us said, why are you even thinking about the book? That already happened. The goal is Bentoism. The goal is this larger idea. There's so much work to be done. Stop wasting it on what's already happened. And this was eye-opening to me, and it took me just 3 minutes to write all this out. And I ended up making a new to-do list after this. And so my to-do list included like write a newsletter, but it also included like plan a date day with my wife, like work on this larger Bentoism project, read this book, and trying to make my time live up to each of these spaces. And so this is something that I would love to invite you to add to your, to just your ritual of life. And I'd love to do it right now for just 3 minutes. Just draw one more bento, draw these spaces, and just ask yourself, speak to your now me, speak to your now us, speak to your future me, listen to those voices as best you can, and let them say what they want out of you. Just imagine the next 7 days of this lockdown, what do those spaces say you should be doing? And I'll set a timer, and we're going to do that, and then have a final benediction. So I'm starting right now. I'm doing it too. Got 30 more seconds. All right. So what I end up doing normally after I write down all those things, I sort of look at them again and just make a list, just trying to put them all together. If this is something that you'd like to continue, I am doing a Zoom group. We'll meet for the first time a week from tomorrow, where for 20 minutes, we'll just gather and silently journal together, and I'll have little exercises we go through each week, just role play in different parts of ourselves, like let's do the bentos of our 10-year-old versions of ourselves, our 20-year-old versions of ourselves, etc. But it's a way to grow your awareness. So we'd love if you joined. There's the link right there. So that I would recommend that heavily informed. There's the Michael Walzer and Elizabeth Anderson books that I mentioned. There's also Mariana Mazzucato, the economist. Her book, The Value of Everything, is really strong and arguing for us settling on a very limited definition of value to be financial value. And she sort of pokes holes in that. The book Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered by E.F. Schumacher is a beautiful book from the early 70s, very wise. And finally, Ken Wilber's A Brief History of Everything about integral theory is really fascinating for sort of like breaking down the compartments and components of truth and sort of our collective and personal selves. But these are all books that heavily influence my thinking and that still ground a lot of my thoughts. And then there's, of course, my own book, which all of those books wish they could be. But the very last thought is to say that this matters in a bigger way than even just hear us right now. So let's imagine this is your bento. Let me zoom in just a little bit. We'll zoom out again. But here's you. I'm called your future us, you too, your child. I've called you your future me, your values, your now us, your relationships. Now let's imagine you have a kid and then their bento appears. And here you can see how your values, the values of you and your partner, and the relationships between you really shape who that person becomes. They're a propulsive force behind them, just as they will be for their children. And just as our parents were for us, they shaped us by their values, their relationships. And that the way the world evolves, the way we go from 28% of college students believing in being rich is essential to 82%, is this gradual process of time I'll call a values helix. Whereas new generations appear and die, our values very slowly either grow or diminish. We go from 28% to 82% in just 2 generations. And this especially happens when we're focused so much on now me, right? When we're not stepping into that full active awareness, when we're not taking that opportunity to more actively shape future me and future us, and thereby shape that next generation. So I believe that it's this process that's gotten us where we are, and I think it's this process that will continue to drive change. Change is not immediate, it takes time. I think it takes about 30 years for these kinds of significant changes to happen. Now, while I started thinking about Bentoism, I was initially felt challenged by the notion of putting forward an idea that even if it were to gain wide acceptance and say shift the value system and our beliefs around self-interest the way that I think they ultimately should, that's a process that would take maybe after my death to have happened, that maybe I wouldn't see the finish line in my life. And that made me question this project. And while I was thinking about that, I went to a museum here in Los Angeles, and while walking around, I just came upon this painting that stopped me in my tracks because it was like it was painted to speak to me at that moment. And it's a Caravaggio called Saint Jerome Writing. And I looked at this painting, and looked at this tired figure, still the very strong arm writing. And I saw this skull, and I imagined that this skull on the left was the last person who had sat in this chair. And that sitting out of frame to the right of St. Jerome was a long line of people waiting their turn to write in the book. And that this was the truth in life, that we're all just writing a few pages or even just a few letters of a much larger book. And so the greatest life is one that we're picking up on the pages that someone else began, and that we stop where someone else can take over. And so I think owning and stepping into that long-term view is how we thrive in a crisis moment. It's how we thrive every day. It's how we thrive over the longer term. So I offer to you the bento as a way to stay in touch with that, as a way to develop that and grow that active awareness, that self-awareness on a regular basis, and a way to operate your life moving forward. You could find me here, ystrickler.com. I have a newsletter where I write about these kinds of ideas. There's also bentoism.org. Yeah, and thanks for listening. Happy to have questions, talk about whatever, but appreciate it.
Wow, that was great. What a good start into Saturday morning / afternoon, evening. Shall we take maybe one question or so? Does anyone have an immediate question? I think people are still mulling over their 2x2s.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Anna. Hi.
Ask away.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, can I go for a question or?
Yes, please.
Please do.
The way back to the breakout room, but so I don't know if this one has already been asked, but I have a question on the on the bento usage, and we actually found out that a lot of values were present in each of the boxes. And the problem where we had, and we said that will be nice to work on the now me values in order to go into the future. So how do you see these things that some values are across the 4 boxes, and how you think we should approach that in the now to get into the future?
Yeah, I think that that makes me think of 2 things. One is that, yeah, I've run a workshop like this for about 1,000 people at this point in like living rooms and online, and probably the most common sort of blocked bento result I see is like both of the nows say no, both of the futures say yes. And to me, that like speaks to, you know, this, like we have to get the now to a certain point for that future to be there. The other thing it makes me think is that in some cases you'll have a 2x2 response, but maybe the question, in the same way I mentioned, Elizabeth Anderson says that we have to find sort of the right domain of value where it's most relevant. I think some questions are more relevant to certain bento spaces than others, right? So it's like maybe our now us says, no, we shouldn't do this, but maybe the now us actually isn't as relevant in this situation. So I think part of it is like what space matters most. The other way I've seen responding to like, maybe one box says no, or something's troubling you, is to sort of unpack the assumptions you're having in there. You know, maybe you're assuming that doing something means, you know, you'd have to do it in a certain way, or this other person would be involved. But maybe there's an additional thing to solve for to turn that no into a yes. I don't think the value of this is just in binary responses. I think in general, it's just awareness of what's going on. But yeah, I don't know if that's helpful to what you're speaking to, but that's sort of how I reflect back.
Yes, definitely. Unpack the assumption. That's actually the way to go into the boxes and make sure that you are in the right domain. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Hey, this was quite a pick-me-up Saturday. Thank you so much for joining. I think I posted the link to the sign-up form to the weekly bento in this chat, and I'm going to share those two, the links to Bentoism and to the intro also in the show notes afterwards. If you have anything else that it would be of value to people. Sometimes people share their slides. I thought it was really quite fantastic, especially the Helix. I thought it was a really, really nice way of kind of enticing people to think more long term. And yeah, thank you so much. I really, really.
Hey, Allison, can I ask one question?
Yeah, if Yancey has time, sneak it in.
Sure, what's up?
Hey, so I wanted to give a shout out just because I actually funded a roller coaster dinosaur game on Kickstarter my freshman year of college. So thank you for letting me do that.
Shout out.
So just yeah, I don't really tell many people about this, but I was sort of curious. I noticed Indiegogo, like during crowdfunding, like during all the token ICO mania, they tried to do an ICO platform on theirs. And I was just wondering, like, is Kickstarter looking at like any other like alternative forms of fundraising, or like are they constantly looking at new mechanisms like a DAO, like a decentralized autonomous organization
Yeah.
with different governance?
I haven't been, I'm like, ambassador emeritus since leaving. So I'm not actively involved in what's going on. Definitely always thinking about other models. But I think that like the ICO and that sort of world, what we see as a feature of Kickstarter is that projects are being funded without a profit motivation, that sort of everyone's just incentivized to, hey, let's just make the project happen. But that for like crowd investing or ICOs, that there is a different mentality that we think is just creates a different mindset for how people pledge. So like we view the lack of profit incentive as being a positive feature of Kickstarter. But I think the model has room to evolve. I mean, Patreon's an evolution of that model. And it's just going to keep going. I think the crowdfunding form is going to continue to provide value in different ways, just because the collective pooling of money is so useful. So I think Kickstarter will continue to be engaged on what's emerging there, but I think there are some assumptions about the business that are unlikely to ever change.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for doing the project, man.
Right. Okay, very cool. Thank you so much again. I think many of us will meet again in your group weekly from now on. So that's exciting. I hope you all have a lovely Saturday. And yeah, I see some of you tomorrow morning. We're going to talk about accelerating vaccine production now. So very much a COVID-focused salon at 9 a.m. And I think David is joining us from Haifa. So until then, I hope you have a lovely Saturday. Thank you so much, Yancey. It was really, really fantastic.
Right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to hang.